Today, we will mostly focus on single time frame analysis, how to do less analysis and easily enter trades, how to use order blocks, imbalances, and liquidity. We will do a full analysis of ranges and liquidity, then how to use structures for price action trading. We will cover many concepts in this video. Do not miss it. If you're ready, let's start. Welcome our free trading course. Our main focus is price action trading strategies and smart money concepts. If you love scalping and day trading or maybe swing trading and looking for special trading strategies, check out my free trading course. You can find the links on Google Drive or directly from my website, which is in the description. Okay, let's talk about how to do less analysis and use single time frames to trade. Today I will focus on 1 hour time frame only. We have been following this chart for a long time. Once this very strong break happened, we all traded this super order block a lot, as you remember on Twitter. Now, what do you see here? Obviously a range. Remember, I draw all of these things for you to understand. I do not need to draw a lot of things on charts because with experience I can see all that with one look. Notice these equal lows at the bottom under the range discount. Price is manipulated right here. This is a manipulation, but it is also range low deviation. You can also see that this nice swing failure pattern. Up until this moment, I never think about trading at all. I'm just trying to understand the price. What did it do? Where is it? Where can it go? Simple questions. Let me zoom into my trade and take a much closer look, removing all other things so you can see clearly. First of all, you can notice the relative equal highs at the top. A nice target for me. Remember, it is also the range high, my natural range target. I think any trader in the smart money trading community can recognize the market structure break right here. Again, why this MSB? It is right after the equal lows hunt. It is the 1 hour order block. It is also the range low deviation. This is not a random MSB. It is at the key point. Notice this full breaker block here and the order block that touches with this nice imbalance. Using the premium and discount tool will help you a lot with entries. This is how I took this simple trade. Right after the intersection of order block, imbalance, and the breaker block. This is an example of casual day trading. Nothing stressful, a large enough stop loss, and enough profit to satisfy me. I was also watching the Ethereum. It was building this extremely perfect range here. Three-top pattern at the top, insane liquidity pool at the bottom. What a great range here. There was also this nice hourly order block at the bottom, which is also a nice FTR candle. Price made a range low deviation and manipulation right here by hunting this massive liquidity pool. I did not check it, but I'm so sure that you could find a great low time frame entry right at this point. I actually expected that it would be a strong enough push to reach to the range high and hunt for some liquidity and then make a big fall. Let's take a closer look at what happened. Price actually made a secondary manipulation here by hunting the liquidity from the first manipulation and got deep into the hourly order block. Here is the deal. I want to repeat one more time. Everything we do here is just educated guesses and reading the price. No one in the world knows what will happen 1 minute later. All these order blocks, ranges, and imbalances are part of backtesting, experience, and education to guess the future. The only thing we can rely on is managing our risk and trusting the statistics. Statistics is the only way to be a long-term winning trader. Here is a nice structure shift after the big bounce from the hourly order block. Price pulls back to this order block and imbalance combo, which I love to trade a lot. It is also forced into the discount zone here. As a target, this imbalance was nice enough. This is another extremely simple 1-hour based trade. Nothing complicated, nothing stressful, and nothing challenging at all. Let's talk about trading styles and how I use them. However, these are my opinions. Everyone is different. First of all, if your entry is under 5 minutes, then you are a scalper in my eyes. If you use over 15 minutes of entry, 30 minutes or hours, then you are a relaxed, casual day trader, like the trade examples in this video. Scalpers should focus on one single asset only and master it. Choose one asset, Bitcoin, gold, Euro USD or NQ futures, but nothing else. One single focus. Now, casual day traders must focus on multiple assets. 2 or 3 will be enough for the most. These pairs are great combos to start with. A scalper should never ever open 2 trades at the same time. It will make you lose your focus and make mistakes. Scalping is the final art of trading. Never forget that. I do a lot of New York Open scalping. Sessions are great for scalpers because they bring a lot of volatility and the price moves a lot. Casual day traders actually do not need sessions a lot. Following structures and waiting for clear trading setups is more than enough for the most. Low time frames are extremely volatile. It is best to end trades as soon as possible. On the other hand, casual day traders first need to learn to wait. A trade could take hours or days. This is why you should trade 2 or 3 assets at the same time to grow your account much faster. Let's talk about what do I do and how I manage my trades. I do both styles. It 100% depends on my time management. If I'm at home, I can do a lot of micro scalping, as I did recently, taking 4 trades on the same day. If I go out for fun or for business, I mostly focus on casual trades with good setups. My main focus is Bitcoin futures. Why? Because it is tax-free in my country. I keep all the profit to myself. I used to trade SPY and QQQ options a lot back in the day. Nowadays, I trade them less, not finding so much time for it. I started to practice my Forex skills a lot in 2023. I only focus on Euro and Pound USD pairs. Now, some people ask me about what I do with profits. I mostly invest the money in real estate, then stocks and some ETFs. Depending on the time of the year, interest rates, and economic conditions. I think you now fully understand how I manage my time, my trades, and my money. Remember, everyone is unique. You'll find what suits you by yourself. No one can tell you that. Okay, folks, as always, all these trading methods are suitable for scalping, day trading, or even swing trading. I believe that it will be really helpful in your trading life. I hope you subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you, please take care and see you soon.